It's a moonless night in the Nunes Forest, 17 kilometres northeast of Lithgow, New South Wales. It's the late 1980s. The forest here is old-growth eucalyptus, tall and dense. That distinctive smell of the Australian bush, the combination of new growth above you and decomposition in the soil beneath your feet. Tony Panicasio is a program director with the New South Wales Department of Sport and Recreation. He runs outdoor camps. He's led countless night walks. He knows the sounds of a possum hitting a branch, of a wallaby spooked and bounding away through the scrub. Tony knows this country. And tonight he has a group of primary school children in his care. And they're walking single file along a trail they walked earlier in daylight, without incident. And as they trudge along, he notices it. Something is moving through the forest beside them. It's not moving away from them, not moving toward them. It's moving with them, step for step, pace for pace, keeping time with the group as it moves through the dark. He stops the children. They all listen, and the sounds stop. They start walking again. And after a few seconds, sure enough, that faint rustle begins again, something very large stalking through the undergrowth with a deliberateness that no wallaby, no wombat, no feral pig has any reason to demonstrate. Whatever's out there is not fleeing. It's not curious. It seems to be tracking them. They get back to camp. He doesn't sleep particularly well that night. It's not the thinness of his sleeping bag or the giggling of the children in the tents next to him that keeps him awake. It's his mind, scanning for answers, fighting with logic that stops him from sleeping. In the morning, Tony walks back along the trail. He's looking for tracks, for scat, for some explanation that will let him file the experience under misidentification. Something that'll enable him to move on. But what he finds, instead, is a tree branch, 15 to 20 centimetres in diameter, snapped off 3 metres above the ground. Not fallen, not cut, snapped. The break is clean and the timber is fresh, 3 metres up. Exactly where he was hearing the sounds from last night. He takes a photograph, and he never takes primary school children on night walks in that forest again. Strewth. G'day, welcome back to Strewth, where we explore Australia's most perplexing mysteries. I'm your storyteller, Mark, and today we go in search of the Lithgow Panther. Lithgow sits at the top of the Blue Mountains, 140 kilometres west of Sydney, at an elevation of about 1,000 metres above sea level. The Great Dividing Range runs through it like a spine. To the east, the land drops away into the gorges and canyons of the Blue Mountains National Park. It's a World Heritage landscape of some 267,000 hectares. A place where sandstone escarpments fall sheer for hundreds of metres into valley floors that rarely see sunlight before mid-morning. The vegetation is dense, tangled. In places it's essentially impenetrable. Planes have gone down in that country and have taken days to locate, even with their black boxes intact. To the west, the land opens into the tablelands. It's farming country, sheep country, the long paddocks of the Central West. Property after property where livestock graze right up to the edge of the bush. It is, in other words, perfect habitat for an apex predator. There's abundant prey, vast cover, and very few humans with any reason to go looking. And according to locals and people who occasionally visit the area, it is indeed an apex predator that has been living there for a very long time. But it's not a dingo, not a fox. It's something that is very unexpected in this or any part of Australia. It's something large, something black, something that moves like a shadow through the undergrowth and leaves behind sheep carcasses wedged in the forks of trees. Something that's been reported by farmers, police officers, wildlife ecologists, government ministers, and a 17-year-old boy who came home one night covered in blood. The first formally recorded sighting in the Blue Mountains database dates to 1926. But the story didn't begin then. It's almost certainly older than that. From the earliest days of European settlement, colonists reported encounters with large, unfamiliar predators. The assumption at the time was that Australia harboured a native big cat, a kind of marsupial panther, perhaps even related to the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. Science then, and now, suggests that it didn't. There was no such creature in Australia. But the sightings kept coming anyway. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the tales came in dribs and drabs. Rabbit hunters stumbling on something in the dark. Bushwalkers catching a glimpse of something black and powerful vanishing into the scrub. A woman named Janet Hurd, walking the mountains in 1968, who saw an animal she could not place and never forgot. Stories that circulated in farming communities without ever making it into the newspapers. Because a farmer who reported a panther to stock agents was the kind of farmer who got laughed out of the sale yards. But local folklore in the Lithgow district was rich with yarns about the Turana tiger, a large black animal systematically working the properties between Turana and Yetum, killing sheep with a precision that confounded the farmers who found the carcasses. That story ended when a landholder shot an unusually large black dog and the kill stopped. But not everybody believed the dog was the whole explanation. By the 1990s, the reports were accumulating into something that was difficult to ignore. Sheep were being found dead in ways that just didn't make sense. A fox kills messily. A dog kills messily. It tears and scatters, driven by excitement and hunger in equal measure. But what these farmers were finding were animals with broken necks. Grass still in their mouths, killed mid-graze, instantly, cleanly, with a precision that suggested something trained for exactly this. And there were some attacks that were even harder to explain. A farmer walking his Gross Valley property one morning finds a ewe he hasn't seen since the previous evening. She's not in the paddock. She's not along the fence line. This sheep is 8 feet off the ground, wedged into the fork of a spotted gum at the bush edge. Hooves dangling, neck snapped, partially consumed around the haunches and the belly. There are claw marks on the bark below the fork, deep ones, in parallel lines, as if something climbed with her weight across its shoulders. This is not Australian predator behaviour. No quoll, no wedge-tailed eagle, no feral dog has any reason or, importantly, any ability to carry a 60-kilogram animal into a tree. There is, however, one predator on Earth that does this routinely. The leopard caches its kills above the ground to protect them from lions, hyenas, and other scavengers. It can haul prey twice its own body weight straight up a vertical trunk. And then it comes back. Night after night, it comes back to feed until there's nothing left. The farmer calls the Department of Agriculture. He's not laughed at exactly, but he's not believed either. And he's not the only one that's been making those types of phone calls. In 1998, a Grosse Valley resident named Chris Coffey had had enough. She'd encountered a large black cat on her property not once, not twice, but 5 or 6 times. She knew what she'd seen, and she knew that no body official was going to do anything about it unless there was a body of evidence too large to dismiss. And so she set about collecting that evidence. The Grosse Valley Group, as it came to be known, systematically gathered and documented sighting reports from across the region. Within a few years, the database held more than 500 entries. Stories from farmers, hikers, motorists, ordinary Australians who'd seen something they couldn't explain and hadn't known who to tell. And that database would eventually land on the desk of Kevin Sheridan, head of the New South Wales Department of Agriculture, and his response would surprise a lot of people. In 1999, Sheridan wrote to Brian Gilligan, Director General of the National Parks and Wildlife Service. The letter, which was much later released under Freedom of Information, reads, in part, "The reports are becoming too frequent for us to ignore the possibility. To do so," Sheridan wrote, "could bring into question government's duty of care if these alleged attacks happen to result in an injury to a person." This is not some drunk spinning yarns at a pub. This is the head of a government department, formally warning that the state might be legally liable if something went wrong. And so, wildlife ecologist Dr. Johannes Bauer of Charles Sturt University was commissioned to investigate. He was given just 2 days. A budget constraint that tells you something about how seriously the government actually wanted the question answered. The investigation was more of a token gesture, to cover themselves if something went pear-shaped down the track. But within those 2 days, Bauer reached a conclusion that sent shockwaves through the state bureaucracy. In his assessment, he wrote, "As difficult as it seems to accept, the most likely explanation of the evidence is the presence of a large feline predator in this area, and most likely a leopard, less likely a jaguar." He described the habitat as optimal leopard habitat, with probably abundant prey in the form of macropods, possums and stray dogs. He noted that a sheep carcass had been found wedged in a tree fork in Grosse Valley, with claw marks on the surrounding branches. This wasn't local folklore. This was a government scientist writing in an official report saying there is probably a leopard in the Blue Mountains. And then came May 2001. Lithgow couple Gail and Wayne Pound filmed 15 minutes of video footage from their back window. On that footage, a large, black, unmistakably feline animal moving through the bush at the edge of their property. Alongside it, a noticeably smaller cat. The bigger animal was later estimated at more than 1.5 meters in length. Bill Atkinson from the New South Wales Department of Agriculture viewed the footage, and his assessment, it's certainly a bloody big cat. Definitely large, definitely black. The story hit the Daily Telegraph and it did not leave. For weeks the panther was front page news. Traps were set, hair collection kits were deployed, infrared cameras were installed. Taronga Zoo even contributed some equipment, and an experienced wild dog tracker was brought in from the bush. And nothing was caught. No camera captured another image. But a researcher named Michael Moss, working through Freedom of Information requests, uncovered something that put the whole investigation in a different light. The New South Wales government had been keeping a secret file on panther sightings for years. Officials, Moss concluded, had been deliberately trying to keep the investigation and sightings secret. The question was obvious. Why? Why would a government go to the trouble of secretly documenting something it officially maintained didn't exist? And then in March 2003, the question became a lot more urgent. Because the Panther, or whatever it was, found a person. His name is Luke Walker. He's 17 years old. It's the evening of the 20th of March, 2003. And he's walking back towards his family's house on a property in Kenthurst, on Sydney's rural urban fringe. The kind of place where the streetlights thin out and the paddocks begin, and the bush is just over the fence. It's around 8:30 at night. He's walked this path before many times. He's not thinking about the bush. He's not listening out for anything in particular. He's in the suburbs, for crying out loud. And then he hears it. A low growl behind him. He turns. 3 to 4 metres away, an animal is watching him. It's crouched low. It's jet black. In the dim light coming from the house windows, Luke can make out its shape. It's broad-shouldered, muscular, somewhere between the size of a large dog and something substantially bigger. His brain just has enough time to register all of this. This thing sitting 3 to 4 metres away from him, cat-like, watching him, before it makes its move. It covers the distance in a single bound. Luke Walker throws his arm up. Instinct, nothing more. And the animal's front claws drive into his forearm. Its back legs smash intentionally into his stomach. The weight of it is enormous. He can feel the heat of it, the muscle, the physicality of something built entirely for this moment. He can smell its breath. He punches it in the face and it lets go. It drops, turns, and vanishes back into the darkness. Luke stands alone in the paddock, shaking. It takes him a moment to understand what on earth has just happened. And then he looks down at his arm. He's bleeding heavily. His t-shirt is covered in blood. The deep lacerations to his right forearm take weeks to heal. Photographs taken 5 months later still show vivid, parallel scratch marks. The wounds become infected. He develops swollen lymph nodes, flu-like symptoms. He finds out later that this is cat scratch disease, a bacterial infection transmitted through cat scratches that, in serious cases, can affect the liver, the spleen, the brain. When police and an investigator, a cryptozoologist by the name of Rex Gilroy, examine the site, they find 6 paw prints near the attack point. Each of the prints measures 10 centimetres in diameter. In a nearby gully, Rex finds a single print measuring 15 centimetres by 16. And just for some reference, a domestic cat's paw measures roughly 3.5 centimetres across. Luke Walker's father, Stuart, tells investigators something the family has been keeping to themselves. For approximately 2 years before the attack, they'd been aware of a large feline animal prowling the property. They'd seen it, but they hadn't reported it, because they just didn't know what to do with that type of information. After the attack, Hawkesbury Mayor Rex Stubbs calls an emergency community meeting. Over 130 witnesses in the Hawkesbury area alone come forward. The meeting is heated, frightened, and very angry. People want to know why the government has been sitting on evidence of this animal for years. They want to know what's being done. And so the New South Wales government quietly commissions its 3rd Panther inquiry. Luke Walker's attack is the most dramatic encounter on record, but it is not unique in its quality of raw fear. December 2013, past midnight in Riverstone, in Sydney's outer northwest, a suburb which, at the time, is on the front line of new housing estates claiming swathes of Aussie bushland. A fellow by the name of Peter Russell is woken by dogs. Not his, the neighbours'. These bloody dogs have woken him plenty of times before. The stupid things will go off at anything, a possum, a passing car. But the noise they're making this night is something lower, more urgent. They're panicked and the sound doesn't stop. So he gets up and goes outside. He moves towards the fence line in the dark. Following the noise, wishing he'd grabbed his phone, the flashlight would have provided him with some small level of comfort right about now. And he sees it before he hears the growl. Stocky, broad across the shoulders. A shape that registers as wrong before his brain is caught up with why. It's too low to the ground for a dog. It's too heavy, too still. It's standing at the edge of the property where the faint glow from the safety light at the back of his house dies. It's watching him. He estimates its height at somewhere between his knee and his hip. And then comes the sound. Low, continuous. A rumble that seems to come from somewhere deep inside that animal's chest. It's the kind of sound that you can feel as much as you can hear. And then it charges. Russell runs inside, the door's locked, his hands still violently shaking when he picks up the phone to call the police. And when investigators take his statement, he tells them that he was genuinely afraid for his life. He wasn't startled, he wasn't surprised, he was afraid. Investigators note, it's almost as a footnote, that the animal has been reported in this area at least 12 times in recent years. 12 times. Different witnesses. And not one official response. In June 2003, Dr. Robert Saltmiris, a North Richmond dentist, not someone given to flights of fancy, turns into his long, steep driveway off Grossvale Road and finds himself within 2 metres of the animal. His headlights catch 2 yellow eyes, low and wide apart, rounded ears, a body he estimates as similar in height to a Great Dane, but longer and jet black. The animal sprints ahead of him up the driveway. He follows in his car. It maintains a gap of 4 to 5 metres at speed, bounding effortlessly uphill, before vanishing into the bush at the top. His 12-year-old son and a friend are in the back seat. They see it as well. And from that moment, Dr. Saltmiris stops letting his children walk outside at night. And then there's Sam Marr, an orthopaedic technician from Perth, walking alone between Pulpit Rock and Pope's Glen Creek at Blackheath in the Blue Mountains on the 15th of March 2018. He's listening to a podcast on headphones. And my apologies to anyone doing the same at the moment, somewhere out on the fringes of the Australian bush. You might want to pause this until you get home. Sam is a tourist. He's got no particular knowledge of the Panther legend. He's overwhelmed, he says, by the sudden sensation that he's being watched. He pulls out his headphones and spins around. What he sees 4 or 5 metres away before it disappears into the dense scrub, with a crash of disturbed earth and breaking undergrowth, is the back half of a large, jet black animal with a long, heavy tail. He stands alone on the track, hands shaking. He tells no one for some time because he can't explain what he saw and doesn't expect to be believed. He wouldn't believe anyone if they told him that tale. But not everyone who encounters the panther actually sees it. Some of them just find what's left behind. A farmer in the Goolgong district, who asked not to be named because he's still bitter about the time a Department of Agriculture officer laughed at him when he brought in an injured sheep, has seen the animal 4 times across 13 years. His sheep have been found dead with what he describes as 2 large puncture marks in the top of the skull and claw marks raking down from the top of the head to the nose. These aren't dog wounds, not fox wounds. He's seen those before plenty of times. This is from something precision engineered for killing large prey from above. He chased the animal in his ute at 60 kilometres an hour and could not keep pace with it. And his dogs couldn't either. In November 2011, at Bilpin, a pet alpaca named Jabiru was killed overnight. His owners were woken at 3 a.m. by their dog barking hysterically. The autopsy revealed puncture wounds to the skull, 4 canine tooth marks arranged in a pattern approximately 7 centimetres wide, 2 impressions on the top of the skull, 2 below the jaw, as if something had taken the animal's entire head in its mouth. The Hawkesbury area ranger concluded it may have been killed by a large cat. Chris Coffey, who we mentioned before and had spent years collecting this type of evidence, put it simply: when a dog attacks, it's scattered. But when a big cat attacks, it's very clean. The physical evidence is substantial in volume and maddening in its inconclusiveness. Paw prints have been documented repeatedly. The most carefully measured were found at Bowen Mountain in November 2003 by Chris Daly, Hawkesbury City Council's chief engineer. They were 10 centimetres wide, 12 centimetres long, with a stride of approximately 80 to 90 centimetres. The print showed the rear foot placed over the front, a walking pattern characteristic of large felines. In 2025, a landscaper named Dan Studders found enormous prints in Kenthurst, in ground so compacted that his own footsteps left no impression whatsoever. Those prints were deeply embedded, spaced 2 metres apart. By 2008, the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries had commissioned its 4th formal investigation into the panther question. 4 inquiries across 9 years, which tells you something in itself about how thoroughly the first 3 had settled the matter. This latest report reached a striking conclusion. A large exotic cat was more likely than not present in the region. This wasn't a fringe researcher working from folklore. It wasn't some crazy podcaster. This was the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, the same body that had commissioned the investigation, saying, in writing, that the animal probably exists. But, astonishingly, that conclusion was removed from the report before it was ever released to the public. The published version said instead that the presence of such an animal could not be discounted. It's a phrase that sounds similar but means something entirely different. One is a conclusive finding. The other, no more than a shrug of the shoulders. And then the DNA evidence complicated things further. Hair and scat samples collected across the sighting zone had been sent to laboratories for analysis. Between 2001 and 2003, the district veterinarian of the Moss Vale Rural Lands Protection Board had studied collected samples and concluded a big cat likely inhabited the region. When the Department of Primary Industries conducted its own comprehensive DNA testing as part of that same 2008 review, the results came back as a domestic dog, large feral cat, or native mammal. No exotic species were confirmed. So in summary, the scientists said probably yes, the DNA said probably no, and then the government quietly buried the probably yes. It's all very confusing. Bill Atkinson, the New South Wales agriculture officer who had gone on record confirming the pound video showed a large cat, was instructed not to speak on the subject. When researcher Michael Moss asked what had changed between the original report and the version the public received, nobody could give him a straight answer. No carcass has ever been recovered. No skull. No skeletal remains. Not in New South Wales. Not anywhere in Australia. So if it is real, If it is out there, or if they are out there, where do they come from? The theory that has lodged itself most firmly in the public imagination involves the Second World War. Hundreds of thousands of American troops were stationed in or passed through Australia between 1942 and 1945. The RAAF base in Richmond sits directly adjacent to the core Panther sighting zone in the Hawkesbury region. And the story goes that American soldiers kept big cats, leopards and pumas, as unit mascots, and that when the war ended and the troops went home, rather than shooting them or sending them to a zoo, they just released them into the bush. It's a compelling story, but it's almost certainly not the whole story, even if it is true, because sightings of large cats in this region predate the Second World War by decades, and also because the Australian Department of Defence has been emphatic that no archival evidence of such a mascot exists. More persuasive, perhaps, is the circus escape theory. In 1924, a puma and a jaguar escaped from Perry Brothers Circus when their railway carriage wall collapsed in Victoria. Documentary evidence confirmed individual big cats were also released by disgruntled circus employees on at least one occasion in New South Wales. And maybe the most intriguing and perhaps most fanciful theory relates to an African lion safari at Warrangamba, which sits on the eastern fringe of the Blue Mountains. The safari operated from 1968 until the early 1990s. It housed lions, tigers, bears, and panthers. Local legend, the type of story that you hear from a mate of a friend who swears he was there, suggests that there might have been some escapees from that facility over the years. The private exotic pet trade might also offer some sort of explanation. Before quarantine regulations tightened, exotic animals moved freely through Australian ports. Even in the 20th century, big cats were reportedly available on the New South Wales black market for approximately $5,000. And some of those cats over the decades were almost certainly released when they grew too large or too dangerous to keep. Dr. David Waldron, a Federation Uni historian who has studied this phenomenon for years, puts it plainly. There definitely have been individual big cats in the bush out there from time to time, even quite recently. That's documented. But the question that remains open, the one that science can't yet answer, is whether those individual animals ever had the opportunity to breed. Whether what we're dealing here is not just a series of one-off escapes and releases, but rather a small, reclusive breeding population, living in 3,000 square kilometres of near, impenetrable sandstone gorge, surviving on wallabies and the occasional sheep and doing what big cats do best, hunt, and remain unseen. The Lithgow Panther is by no means alone with regards to Australian folklore. Phantom big cats have been reported in every mainland Australian state for over a century. The Grampians puma in Western Victoria, the Gippsland phantom cat, the Amauville panther in northern New South Wales, where farmer Clive Berry lost 2,000 pounds worth of sheep in a single season in 1958, and 7 of his large steers were torn apart in ways that defied explanation. Approximately 85% of all of those reported animals are described as being jet black, and descriptions are relatively uniform across decades and state boundaries. A powerful build, a long heavy tail, the size of a large dog or even bigger. In 2024, a prospector named Angus James filmed a large black cat near Ballarat in Victoria. The footage accumulated 2.5 million views in a matter of days. The Discovery Channel documentary The Hunt, in search of Australia's big cats, went all out. They deployed camera traps, thermal drones, hired a former Australia Zoo big cat keeper, and investigated across multiple states. But they found no conclusive evidence, and neither has anyone else. And so the Lithgow Panther, whatever it is, is simultaneously too persistent to dismiss, and yet too elusive to confirm. The eyewitnesses are too credible, too consistent, too numerous to write off as hysteria or misidentification, and yet the proof refuses to materialise. The New South Wales Bathurst MP Gerard Martin put it best after the 2002 government inquiry wrapped up without a definitive answer. After all, it's not been proven that something is not out there. Something is moving in the Blue Mountains. It's been moving there for a long time. It breaks branches 3 metres above the ground and leaves sheep with snap necks and grass still between their teeth. It bounds across driveways in the beam of headlights with yellow eyes and rounded ears. It leaps from 3 metres away and puts a teenage boy in hospital. And every morning when the sun comes up over the sandstone ridge line and burns the mist out of the valleys below, it's gone again. Thanks for listening to another episode of Strewth. This was a request from a loyal listener named Trent. Thanks, Trent, for your request. And also a big thank you to everyone who's joined Strewth Premium so far. Listeners on Patreon get early access to our episodes 1 week early every week. And there's also one bonus episode each week that covers things like Strewth abroad, mysterious cases from all around the world, some listener tales, and some other craziness that I'm working on currently. As I said, follow the links below if you want to join us over on Strewth Premium. But if you can't and you'd still like to support the show, I really appreciate all the messages that I receive of people telling a friend. It means a lot to an independent podcaster. It's the best way for us to get the word out. Thanks again. I'll catch you next time.